Alright folks, it's time to get excited because today we are talking about King Kong, more specifically Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, if you were wondering. Movie licensed games were an interesting phenomenon that were especially prominent during the PS2's run, during which you could pretty much guarantee that any blockbuster or kids film would have a video game adaptation, whether it was something like Star Wars or Flushed Away. These things were everywhere when I was growing up. Though this trend didn't completely die out once the Xbox 360 and PS3 were introduced, there was a very sudden decline of such games, which as far as I'm concerned was mostly a good thing. Often, movie games were just blatant cash grabs hoping to capitalize on little kids who didn't know any better or parents who also didn't know any better. That's kind of the thing that makes this King Kong game so interesting. It was a launch title for the 360, as well as releasing on the PS2 and the other 6th generation consoles, so it certainly could have been a lazy, boring reinterpretation of the film, and nobody would have batted an eye. But it actually turned out to be a pretty ambitious, original first-person game. Speaking of which, that's enough of my dumb face. Let's check out the game. We start off with a nice, atmospheric menu screen. Except look at that boat. And those mountains. And what is that even supposed to be? Okay, so the game looks a little dated, which isn't exactly surprising considering that this released in 2005. A similar revelation occurs in the first level, which also looks pretty nice until... oh god, that close-up. Generally, I found the environments and setting to be impressive throughout the game, and the character models aren't too bad from a distance. It may not be quite the spectacle that it was in 2005, but the visuals don't detract from the atmosphere too much, at least for me. It has a certain charm to it, and for 2005 it could be much worse. Also, the amount of different hostile creatures you'll encounter throughout the game surprised me quite a bit, with some interesting designs, particularly these giant millipedes that made my skin crawl pretty much every time they showed up, though I'm extremely prone to being afraid of stuff like that. The cast from the film seemed to have reprised their roles for the game, which was a nice touch, and I'm actually really glad that they didn't just try to recreate movie scenes as in-game cutscenes like they used to do all the time in games, because that just always kind of looks like shit. As this game's outro cinematic proves. Why is he making that face? Ooh, spoiler alert by the way. My bad. Story-wise, this game is based on a movie, if you didn't get that memo by now. I haven't seen the film for years at this point, but I remember liking it. For the majority of the game, you'll play as Jack Driscoll, a screenwriter who's tagged along with Jack Black's crazy-ass character Carl Denham, who wants to make a movie on some weird island. The crew pretty much instantly realized that the island isn't exactly paradise when stuff like these weird rock spiders, giant bats, and literal fucking dinosaurs start attacking them. And of course, shortly after arriving on the island, Kong himself shows up to capture actress Ann Darrow. So a lot of the game is spent trying to rescue her, and also just trying to get off the island to get to safety in general. The story from the film doesn't seem to be followed exactly here. It's more of just a Cliff Notes or abridged version. But like I mentioned before with the cutscene element, it's probably good that they didn't try to get too ambitious with the storytelling. I mean, just look at the names of these levels. Fight? There's no question what happens in that level, I guess. And also, Jimmy? Like, who even came up with these titles? Did Peter Jackson really read the titles Fight and Jimmy and think that that really captured the spirit of the film? But yeah, that could be an indication of how much, or perhaps how little time was allocated for the story elements of the game. Gameplay is where things start to get interesting. You may have noticed the lack of any kind of heads-up display in my gameplay footage, and believe it or not, that's kind of the defining characteristic of the game. In most games, you'd at least have an ammo counter and an aiming reticle. I believe the latter of which can actually be toggled in the menu, but that's beside the point. King Kong opts for a more atmosphere-driven gameplay, where the majority of the time there won't even be a weapon occupying the screen. You have to hold the left trigger to use your gun, and then you can aim down sights to be a little more precise if necessary. I liked this a lot because the majority of the time there's really no point to have the gun visible on screen anyways. In place of an ammo counter, your character will call out how much ammo you have left when you press B, and he'll also let you know when you're almost out or when you need to reload. This is a simple but effective way to make the game feel more immersive, and I liked it a lot. I ended up really enjoying the simplistic, essentially non-existent user interface in King Kong. I think especially because the trend in contemporary gaming seems to be shifting towards cramming as much shit on the screen as possible. It's nice to sometimes not be berated with stuff that constantly reminds you that you are in fact playing a video game. Like, I don't know about y'all, but one of the main reasons that I play video games is so that I can forget about real life for a while. I guess with these graphics, that's a little easier said than done, but I appreciate the idea regardless. Combat is similarly simplified, with weapons and ammo being in relatively short supply throughout, which certainly makes your enemies seem more threatening and your circumstances feel more dire on the island. You'll often have to resort to using these wooden spears or these huge dinosaur bones that you can throw to take care of enemies, which is also a neat mechanic. These things aren't exactly in short supply, but they're much less effective than your firearms. You can light these on fire to deal a little more damage, but it's still important to try and conserve your ammo, because a lot of the bigger enemies won't go down no matter how much shit you throw at them. If anything, I think it would have been cool if they expanded on the makeshift weaponry thing a little more. I'm not saying like they needed a full-on crafting system or something like that, but it would have been cool if you could maybe like use a smaller dinosaur bone as a knife, or make some kind of projectile weapon out of rocks, or something like that. Guns can be found in these crates that you'll find throughout most levels. You can only carry one at a time, so occasionally you'll have to decide between two. The pistol and shotgun are most common, but even these will run out of ammo pretty fast if you're careless. You'll also get some kind of hunting rifle with a scope later in the game a few times that kind of functions as a sniper rifle. And on rare occasions you'll get a Tommy gun. They're all fun to use, but I think the lack of ammo is actually my favorite bit about the implementation of guns. Not only does it make sense story-wise, as a random island isn't likely to just have firearms laying around, but it also works in the Resident Evil sense, in that you have to think a little bit about what you can do to conserve your ammo so that you'll have some when you need it the most. The placement of weapons throughout the levels is really well done, and there's also a bait mechanic that is presumably intended to help you conserve your ammo by distracting certain enemies. Most of the creatures on the island will eat other species if you kill one nearby them. I like the idea of this mechanic a lot, but it isn't implemented terribly well. It seemed like every time I tried to do this, either the enemies just wouldn't be close enough to the bait to be attracted to it, or some would and some wouldn't, leading to a big fight that would inevitably conclude with me needing to kill all the enemies anyways. For 2005 though, it was pretty ambitious of them to even include something like this, and when it did work, it was pretty neat. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a surprising amount of variety when it comes to the creatures you'll face off against in King Kong, with all kinds of insects, stuff like giant bats, and dinosaurs. Not much is done to differentiate combat with each of these creatures, but I appreciated all of the different designs and unique encounters regardless. There isn't really a health mechanic in this game, so 2 or 3 hits from any of these guys will kill you. So generally, you just want to either take them out from a distance as fast as possible, or avoid them. Despite Jack Driscoll's frail nature though, I didn't actually die that much. Certain sections with more or tougher enemies were a little tricky, but it didn't feel artificially difficult like a lot of old movie games. On several occasions you'll take on boss creatures, which are often just bigger variants of the normal ones. They aren't too remarkable gameplay-wise, but they help with the pacing and are generally at least cool to look at. The cast of creatures may not be terribly distinguishable from one another in terms of gameplay, but they provide a unique challenge regardless, as you have to decide how to take them on in each combat segment. Also, the millipedes are still scary. F those guys. When playing as Jack, you'll also occasionally have to solve a few puzzles, which usually consist of either finding levers to open these gates or finding fire to burn down bushes, which you and your crew are incapable of just walking through for some reason. I don't see any thorns on those things, guys. These segments didn't tend to leave me scratching my head, but they did really let the game's atmosphere shine, with the sound design and general eeriness of the island taking the forefront. This game is called King Kong. Well, actually, Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, but you get the idea. So, it would pretty much be a crime if you didn't get to play as the titular character himself. But you do, so it's all good. The fixed camera angles in these segments are a product of their time, but they really do just suck. Either you can't see everything you need to see, or you'll be running the opposite direction like a fucking moron every time the angle switches. It's just never where you want it to be. But that's okay. The game is 17 years old, so I'll give it a pass. Besides the gnarly camera, playing as Kong is kind of just jank anyways. The smaller enemies will go down in one hit for the most part, but with the bigger guys, you pretty much just get stuck in these pissing matches where you take turns hitting each other until one of you goes down. The only real strategy I found to remedy this was doing the dash attack every time, because it stuns your enemies just long enough so that you can use it repeatedly. But that's stupid and there's no way that was intentional. There's also a grab move, but it seems like it does fuck all most of the time. Just the lack of having any kind of dodge or counter makes fighting the bigger dinosaurs and stuff like that a little lamer than it could be. But regardless, I'm still happy that these sections are in here. And it definitely can be fun when you're just running around wrecking shit. Despite the fixed camera. And the platforming that feels like you're slip and sliding on Kong's diarrhea. There's a band name for somebody. I'll need some of those royalties though when you make it big. So yeah, Kong segments are kind of a mixed bag. But honestly, it's just nice that they were included at all. King Kong isn't a perfect game, but for me at least, it sticks out as a rare example of a movie game that isn't a complete pile of shit. And I'm fucking glad because this thing was like $70 when I bought it last year. And it actually probably could have been more, but I decided to buy the disc and the case and manual separately. Let's just say I'm something of a collector myself. But yeah, the price might have mellowed out a little bit since then, but maybe consider getting this on a different platform? I don't know. Because unless this thing is made out of gold or something, I don't see why it costs that much. Considering what I spent on this game, you know, it would help a lot if you would consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see more stuff like this in the future. Leaving a like on the video is also very helpful. Comments also help out a lot. Seriously though, y'all have been killing it lately. In my last review, I stated that my goal was just to get past the dreaded 69 subscriber count, but now we're almost to 80, which is fucking awesome. Thanks a lot for that, guys. If we could get to 100 or even potentially beyond by the end of the year, I think that would be incredible. If you want to help out with that goal, sharing this video with someone else who you think would like it would be awesome. And I would appreciate you forever. Thanks again, everyone. You're all badasses. I appreciate every one of you, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.